Joining me now to discuss all sorts of things is political commentator Chloe Dobbs. We're going to kick off, Chloe, with a conversation about Angela Rayner, because Angela Rayner was in the newspapers at the weekend. Sunday, I think it was, the Mail on Sunday broke a story about how she'd sold a council house that she had bought before she was a politician and made something like a £48,000 profit. Lots of Labour apparatchiks were up in arms saying, oh, what's wrong with that? Why can't a Labour MP actually make some money out of buying a council house and selling it? But the trick to the story is that she may or may not have been living there as a sort of a first residence. And if it wasn't the case that she was living there, then she would not be able to make that money without paying capital gains tax on it. The story's been sort of rumbling around for a few days, and it's suddenly starting to pick up a little bit of traction. And Harry Cole from The Sun tweeted this today, just a few hours ago. 1:20 today, Starmer's spokesman says all further questions about Angela Rayner's tax affairs are to be directed to Angela Rayner's office, right? At 3:20, 2 hours later, Angela Rayner's office say questions should be directed to the Labour Party press office. And at 3:30, Labour press office say questions should be directed to Angela Rayner's office. So they're kind of going round and round in circles, and nobody really wants to address the story.
Yeah, just trying to hand the problem to someone
else.
Yeah,
and I mean, it may well be that she hasn't done anything wrong, because if she was living there, there's nothing wrong with making 48,000 quid. Some people can say she's a bit of a hypocrite because she's talking about trying to reduce the discount that you get for selling a council house on. So it really depends on whether she was living there or not. And there seems to be some dispute about that because she got married to a guy who she said was living in a different property for a time while she was living in that property. So there's a lot of kind of mists of unsurety going on.
Yeah, it seems like there's been some dodgy paperwork done to make sure that she's able to make this 48k profit. And I think the reason this is making the headlines is because she's criticising a scheme that she has been able to have a huge advantage from. And I think that what this is revealing is that the Labour Party cannot take the moral high ground anymore. We have this saying, Tory sleaze. It's always the Tories that are up to no good, getting into scandals, be it expenses or whatever else. And Labour paint themselves as the nice guys. And then we've had this, we've had everything that's gone on with Azhar Ali. In Rochdale, the Labour Party seem to be getting scandal after scandal. They're maybe trying to sweep this under the carpet this week so they can keep all the limelight on Lee Anderson.
So, well, that's exactly what they're hoping to do. But the problem is that now James Daly, Conservative MP for Bury North, has written to Greater Manchester Police to ask them if they will investigate and find out whether any of these documents were correct and if any of these documents were, in fact, not correct. Because if they weren't, she'll have to kind of answer for it. And at the moment, all she's done is sort of answered on a thread on Twitter to say it's all rubbish.
Which is not really enough, is it?
Which is not quite enough if you want to be in government. And I think this is what's going to finally start happening to the Labour Party. If it looks like they're getting closer to being in Downing Street, they're going to have to answer an awful lot of questions about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. A woman in such a high position in the party, you cannot expect to be in a position of that high authority in politics and not be under scrutiny for what you do in your private life. That is part of the job, I'm afraid. You cannot do dodgy stuff with your tax returns. You cannot do dodgy stuff with the paperwork on your house if you're in such a high position. And it doesn't even get away with it. So good on that Tory MP.
And it doesn't matter really if it happened before she was an MP, because it still means that it has some relevance. And she had already been selected, we believe, by the time that all happened, to be a Labour MP while the whole sale of the house was going on. Basically, there's a book that's out now from Lord Ashcroft who says that Miss Rayner bought a former council house in Stockport under the right to buy scheme in 2007, sold it 8 years later, made £48,500 in profit. But as I say, the question is all about whether she was living there at the time, because if it was a second home, you've got to pay capital gains tax. I mean, there's a lot of people getting quite worked up on various newspaper websites saying, well, if that's the case, I want my capital gains tax back, because I sold a house and I got taxed for it.
Yeah, exactly. It shouldn't be one rule for politicians and another for the rest of us peasants in society.
Exactly.
And as I said, this tells you a lot about someone's character if an MP is breaking the rules. Like I said, Labour paint themselves as the moral party.
Holier than thou.
Exactly. They think that there's some kind of holy religion that would never do anything wrong. And that myth is starting to be broken apart now with this going on. And I can't remember, I think it was a Labour councillor recently was also found to be saying that the Tories aren't building enough social housing while she's clinging on to her council home whilst earning something like 80 grand a year.
There's always plenty of that stuff to go around. But let's move on slightly because there's been an awful lot of non-stop protesting about the situation in Gaza over the last few months. Now the government's looking at ways to manage it with these incessant demonstrations and the pressure they are putting on policing, starting with 31 million quid to be spent on bolstering MP security after several parliamentarians like Tobias Ellwood were targeted at home. I mean, one of the things James Cleverly is looking to do, the Home Secretary, is to say, well, you know, surely with the police now saying it's cost 25 million so far to police all of this stuff, at least the least thing they should do is give more notice of when they want to actually make these demonstrations happen. But the demonstrators are saying, we'll do whatever we like. Thanks very much. We won't bother telling you.
I know. And I think when we saw them on Tower Bridge on Saturday, just completely bringing the world to a halt, I think they hadn't told anyone that they were going to be there.
Absolutely not.
That was completely unacceptable, and they should be held to account.
Of course. So effectively, they can bring a street to a complete standstill, a major crossing across the river to a complete standstill, and nobody does anything.
I know, and this is every single Saturday now that we're seeing absolute chaos. We've seen this report come out from the Home Affairs Committee showing that 90% of Jews avoid city centres on a Saturday. Most people work Monday to Friday. They've only got 2 days to enjoy themselves, and Saturday you're locked in your home terrified. We've seen Jewish homes get targeted. It's absolutely unacceptable. And this is costing a lot in policing. And it's not sustainable because there just aren't enough officers. A lot of officers have missed their days off and had to work crazy overtime hours just to police it, and that's only sustainable for so long.
Exactly right.
But I don't think we should ban the protests and stop them from happening.
It's time, though. I mean, James Cleverly's basically said, look, you've made your point. You've done one protest after another pretty much week in, week out since October the 7th. You know, what exactly are you going to achieve? I mean, my suggestion earlier this week was to say to them, look, you can have one protest a month. You can cordon off an area in Hyde Park and you can go there and have a rally. And you can have speakers, you can have, you know, microphones, you can sing songs, you can wave flags, you can build a stage, do whatever you like, but do it once a month. And I think that would be fair.
Yeah, I think that actually that's quite a good solution because the amount of money it's costing, that's money that could be going towards solving knife crime in London. And I think also when these protests do happen, I think that the police do need more men or maybe they need to be trained better on what to do, because what I'm seeing at the protests is that when something kicks off, the police deal with the person that's easiest to deal with rather than the person that's in the wrong. So we saw last weekend a guy, I don't know if you saw it, holding up a sign saying, are Hamas a terrorist organisation? Yes or yes. Right, his sign actually goes along with...
Not only did we see the sign, we had him on the show.
Oh, brilliant.
So there you go.
That goes along with the government's view that Hamas is a prescribed terrorist organisation. But he was the one who was carried away by police, whilst these horrible people were throwing sticks at him and
soil and all sorts of stuff.
They're the ones in the wrong. Those are the ones who should be dealt with by the police. And then we saw in Scotland that Jewish man asked, can you remove your Star of David? Because there are only 3 officers here, and if that huge mob kicks off at you, we won't be able to deal with it. But it's wrong to go after the Jewish man who's in the right rather than deal with the people that are in the wrong. So
it is.
I think your solution's quite good, actually.
I think it's not bad. It's suggested to James Cleverly if we can get him on. In fact, I've got Tobias Ellwood coming on a little bit later on. We'll ask him about that. Chloe, thanks very much indeed.